thought it'd be fun for our shows this week to fire up some drafts. We've gotten an opportunity to talk about a lot of the rookies. For everyone who watched our draft stream, thank you so much. That did really well. We were really excited about that. All through day 2, you can find all that on YouTube if you want to go back and watch any of our initial takeaways. We did a mock draft at the end, a rookie mock draft through round 3 of the reality draft. We didn't know the day 3 landing spots. You've since written up the rookies some more on RotoViz, some fun takes on some of the day 3 guys as well. We got some fun landing spots back there. But rather than just talk rookies all over again this week, we wanted to go draft some teams, build some winners on Underdog. And I mean, it's a fun contest this year. They've flattened the payout structure a little bit. No more regular season prizes, or they flattened the payout structure a ton, which is incredible. There's some massive increases to some of the finishing spots a little bit further down, like 15th. I saw a tweet about the 15th spot being, going from like $15,000 last year to $100 and something thousand this year, which is just incredible to see that trickle down effect of a flattening payout structure. A lot more people are going to walk away from the tournament feeling they, made life-changing money or something. So that's incredible.
You're hinting that we're going to finish 15th instead of first.
I mean, I would take 15th. We went into the final of the FFPC main event, the final day, the final Sunday in second place, Sean, and finished in 30th. So we would have taken 15th over 30th. The final day did not go our way. Had some paths to first there at the very end. So if you're telling me we're going to finish 15th instead of first, and I have to take that right now, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take 15th and be okay with it. But certainly, to have the shot at first, or to have the shot at anything is fun. That's what we do. That's what we're all about. So we're going to draft some teams here, Sean. Real quick, before I throw it over to you, for anyone who isn't aware, you can go to the RotoViz Fantasy Football YouTube page, same place that live stream was that I just mentioned. Make sure to click subscribe. But even if you don't subscribe, you can find this video and you can watch along to our drafts. You can see the board. We're going to have that all up on screen. If you're an audio listener, we'll do our absolute best to tell you the picks that are coming in and the decision points and all that stuff. But the clocks are 30-second pick clocks. Underdog is notoriously a quicker draft. That's why we're going to do 3 of them. It's really fun. We're going to work through that quickly. If you want to watch along, RotoViz Fantasy Football YouTube page.
And as you mentioned, I think in the past, Ben, just subscribing isn't going to get you spammed. If you do want to know when things happen, you can click for notifications, which will help you know when those are. You mentioned the launch. I was lucky enough to get to do one of the very first drafts this week with Peter Overzet in the Best Ball Banana Stand. And the former kind of RotoViz Best Ball feed is going to be the Best Ball Banana Stand this year. Some little thing you can do for me and Ben if you want is to subscribe to that. That does actually help us in a small way as well. Again, only if you are interested in that and want it. I don't want to clutter up your devices if you don't. But if you're looking for those drafts, you can find them there. Ben, maybe you weren't as obsessed with these players as I was, but how did you feel about the guys that we waited 4.5 hours for going like within the first 5 minutes of day 3?
That was awesome. No, I was very obsessed with it too. The first 2 guys, Troy Franklin and Jatavion Sanders, who we talked about on the stream. I was like doing backflips when that happened on day 3 because it was. You don't like to see the fall. You feel a little crazy about the fall. We had a lot of people referencing 2 years ago when we ended up doing a day 3 stream as well. And we spent the whole day 3 stream still like, is Sam Howell ever going to get drafted? And he finally went in round 5. To see Sanders come off the board with the first pick of pick 4, and then the Broncos trade up to stop Troy Franklin's fall into the 402. Yeah, I thought that was incredible. That was fun to see. And then we got some other really fun landing spots. We get Javon Baker landing with the Patriots. My UW guy, Jalen Polk, had already landed there. That started some interesting conversations about the Patriots because he's a prospect that people really enjoy. You get the running back landing spots. I'm trying to pull it all up right now, but some fantastic ones. Kamani Vidal, who you've talked a lot about, landing with the Chargers in round 6 was probably my favorite. You have Tyrone Tracy, who we talked about, landing with the Giants is a fun one. Several earlier ones. We were really excited about Will Shipley, Sean, and him landing in round 4 to the Eagles, to me, immediately called to mind when we had DeAndre Swift going there last year and some of the conversations about passing to the backs and how that really didn't work out well for DeAndre Swift. It's just not a great system for running back receptions. So mitigates, I think, the statistical upside of one of the most exciting parts of one of the most exciting late round running backs. That was a little bit of a bummer. A lot of fun ones. Jalen Wright to the Dolphins, I really liked on day 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, Ben, I mean, we may have to do at least like the first hour of day 3 next year because we got that running back run there in round 4. That would have been so fun to discuss with you.
Yeah, it really would have been. And we that's a great call. I think that's what we'll have to do. It's just tough to do.
It's a lot
for a third straight day, the whole of day 3. But I think you've just solved our problem. We'll just do like round 4 and then we'll call it good at that point and log off. Sean, our first draft is underway. We got the 110. We're doing 3 drafts today. We're hoping to get some different spots. We're going to start with a late round draft slot, a late in the round draft slot, not late round, I guess. For those of you following along on YouTube at RotoViz Fantasy Football YouTube page, you'll be able to see sort of who Sean is starring in the queue and all of that stuff as I kind of just narrate over the back. But Breece Hall goes immediately into the queue, Sean, at the top. He's got a little bit of a higher ADP than 10. We'll see if he slides. A lot of receivers early in this draft so far. A.J. Brown just goes 107, Bijan Robinson 108. We are one pick away in the potential for Hall to come in a little bit below his ADP.
Yeah, and that's one where Pat and I had talked about him in my rankings pre-draft. Then he does go there at 9. We'll get back to that in a second. Puka, Garrett Wilson. I mean, I'm going to end up with a lot of Garrett Wilson. We take him here every time, but I mean, that's kind of where I lean, but I'm good with Puka too.
I think it's our first draft. I think our first pick of the year, Sean, has to be Garrett Wilson. I'm good with Puka too. I will absolutely be ranking Garrett Wilson ahead of Puka Nacua. I've made that case over at Stealing Signals already in my Targets Per Out Run articles. The way that best ball works, you do want to get exposure to Puka Nacua still. I still think his profile is very strong. And to your point right there, if we take Garrett Wilson over Puka Nacua every time, you're going to wind up with a lot of Garrett Wilson. You have to play the ADP game a little bit, especially in these early rounds. But it was our first pick. It's our first pick of the year. We got to take the guy that we both agree is a great option for 2024. We quickly are back on the clock. Marvin Harrison goes 111, Puka Nacua, Gibbs, Saquon Barkley. The only guy left in the queue you have is Drake London. I think he's pretty clearly the end of a tier here. It's a no-brainer for me as well to start there. And structurally, Sean, we really like this wide receiver start. We really like those mid-round tight ends. We've talked through this a little bit. Is that still where you're feeling? Because I feel really comfortable with the wide receiver start with these 2 year 3 guys.
Yeah, and we're not really getting any kind of discount for the fact that Wilson and London have certainly disappointed last year for contextual reasons, but I do like getting third-year players, very young players. I guess I don't really expect them to have the ceiling, maybe Garrett Wilson, but that ceiling to jump into the top 5. And yet when you're drafting at the back of the round, to be able to get London, who, as you referenced, probably there's a big tier break after that. That's a pretty big advantage, right? So you don't get access to the very top players, but you do get a second guy before that meaningful tier break. I like that aspect of it. We were talking about Breece Hall a little bit there for a moment. I think I do have to move him down a couple of spots because they added all of these running backs. It's going to be hard for him to get the absolutely epic workload that might have allowed him to be like the clear guy who would be next year's 101, who separates from the entire group of fantasy players with those additional guys behind him. Are you seeing it that way, or is it kind of a thing where, I mean, obviously he's not going to get every single touch. Who's behind him doesn't matter.
I mean, I definitely would have liked to take Brees there. I think I'm not concerned about the guys behind him at all. I think it was overblown a little bit. I've seen some of the conversation and obviously with Braylon Allen landing there in round 4 and Abanikanda as an option. But I mean, I'm more concerned about Aaron Rodgers, really. I mean, if he can make the offense flow, his lead running backs have always been really good. It's a question of whether the Jets are actually good and efficient offensively. But if they are, I think you absolutely want Brees. I mean, you have to have Brees Hall as a top. I mean, you're suggesting potentially the number 1 running back, but even a top 3 running back is incredibly strong. You just pulled up the overall draft board here. The draft out of the 102 spot just went Kyron Williams, Devon Achane at the 2-3 turn. Those guys were going in the early part of the second round in the pre-draft section. Those are 2 guys that I didn't draft, I think, at all in my 20 pre-draft drafts. And I talked a little bit about thinking they might have some running backs land there. They both did. Jalen Wright, we just mentioned to Miami, Blake Corum on day 2 to the Rams. They both do slide here to the round 2-3 turn. That drafter started 3 straight running backs, took McCaffrey in the first round. An interesting move, and you get a lot of firepower. I think those 2 guys sliding is sort of double counting, I guess, or maybe they just were going far too high. But Kyron Williams to me becomes really interesting, and Achane, both of them become really interesting at the 2-3 turn now if you can start to get those prices.
Yeah, for me, after London, the next 3 guys would probably be Williams, Achane, and Chris Olave. And so to get him where he got him is a very good price. Ben, we are back up. Josh Allen does just go. He wouldn't have really been in the consideration for me. Sam Laporta, Devontae Smith, who over the second half of last year was at least A.J. Brown's equal. You get a pretty big discount there. I mean, those are probably the guys, but Tank Dell, I know you're not as high on him. Who do you like?
Yeah, one of Laporta or Devonta, I think, is the right move here. I'm okay pushing tight end if you prefer Devonta, but Laporta is the sort of the ADP pick. We go with Laporta there. Definitely happy to get exposure to Laporta. We've talked through all the tight ends being underpriced. Getting Laporta at a 2-pick discount shouldn't be a problem or feel wrong in any kind of way. But for some reason, for me, it's like we talked through the ceiling element of him as the tight end 1 and how that's probably keeping down not just his ADP, but sort of the whole group of tight ends in ADP because everything kind of falls in line. And so getting a tight end that you don't think really has round 2 ceiling at the late round 3 where he's still like a value at that point because the floor is incredibly high and you feel really strong about him it's just not as fun as like, oh, well, we could have got somebody else a little bit later. But I don't think at the back end turn we're going to be in position to get McBride, where we certainly won't with where his ADP is at now. I'm just seeing it's at 45. And we see Kelsey and Kincaid both go on the turn there. Devonta Smith wraps around, Sean. I'm very comfortable taking him if that's where you want to go.
Yeah, that's a good ADP value here. Any boost to that Eagles offense, I think, is going to be more valuable to Smith than it is to AJ Brown, because for AJ Brown, all that production is already priced in, and you have to have the Eagles offense be more dynamic than it was. Whereas Devontae Smith, especially in round 4, he's not going to crush you if they struggle again. If they're successful, I mean, he should be a round 2 pick. And so I absolutely love the fact that we were able to get both guys there.
And structurally speaking, you have to love our start. Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Sam Laporta, Devonta Smith. The running back values are going to be there. This is a really wide receiver heavy, 0 RB heavy type of draft. Talked about the drafter in the number 2 slot going running back to start. But that was the only drafter to, I think, at that point on the first like 6 or 7 drafters to have even taken a running back. The 4 slot takes a running back in the 3rd round, Josh Jacobs, his first. And now coming back here in the 4th, the drafter out of the 6th slot takes a 4th round running back, Travis Etienne. But the first 7 drafters had all gone wide receiver to start, other than that number 2 slot. We also did in the pick 10 slot, a lot of sort of 0 running back or 0 running back adjacent strategies to start here. As we are one of now the only teams who have not taken one through 4 rounds. But I guess actually, no, that's not true. The 5th slot, the 7th slot, both still do not have a running back. Picks 1 and 3 have not yet picked here in the 4th round. For those watching on YouTube, we are nearing the end of the 4th round. The 3rd slot also just took their 4th straight receiver. So we have multiple teams building sort of 0 running back builds. Structurally, feel really good about that, Shawn. And then the other big thing that we saw there, and this, for me, this is my first draft in Best Ball Mania. A couple days into it, we talked a lot before the draft about the values of tight ends. I wrote about it at Stealing Signals. I think people that are following us and were doing some big board drafting prior to the draft know that we liked the prices there. As I was talking about Laporta a little bit at 310, I was kind of thinking through those prices. Kelsey goes 312. Kincaid goes 402. I did not see him that high pre-draft in any of my drafts. And then McBride goes 406. I did not see him that high in any of my. You could consistently get McBride sort of in the 5th. And I've consistently wrote that I thought that he should be going higher than that. You absolutely have to take him at those prices. I still love him in the 4th. But to see all 3 of Kelsey, Kincaid, and McBride go that quickly, and here Mark Andrews now going at the 501, the tight end prices are starting to finally push up a little bit. It's consolidating. I mean, Laporta in this particular draft falls behind ADP, but it's consolidating. As soon as Laporta went, other tight ends went. Interesting to see that little bit of early ADP adjustment in the post NFL draft landscape. So we're heading back in the 5th round. You're throwing a couple receivers in there. You threw Kyle Pitts in there. I would love a crack at him and to get 2 elite tight ends and call it good at that position. I think at these prices is absolutely something we could consider.
And as we get to this second pick, just to kind of follow up my note, there was some more concrete information over from week 10 on last year. Devontae Smith averaged 13.3 in half PPR. AJ Brown at 8.8. The yards per route, almost a half a yard higher for Smith. Now, AJ Brown still was doing more targets per route. There was a big gap in their yards per target. You wouldn't necessarily, again, expect that to continue, but we want to be aware of what Devontae Smith did last year. I think that he should be much, much higher. Then we're roaring toward Jaden Reed and Jordan Addison being the receivers available. I've also added George Kittle and Brock Bowers. Bowers going at 84, not necessarily somebody we have to take here. Reed goes 1 pick ahead of us. I just want to keep him in mind. I'm not necessarily pushing him in drafts, but I do think he's a little bit undervalued. What do you like?
Pitts is fine. That's who you have at the top of the queue. My pick here would be Rashee Rice, who I still think is being kind of multiple counted as well. Some of the off-field stuff is a concern, but I think he's a screaming value at 5'10". And I've seen people talk about this on social and say that like once he falls to 6, everything else will be baked in. I understand the Xavier Worthy pick. Xavier Worthy is going to play a very different role in this offense. You got to understand the distribution of targets for the speed players in the KC offense, the Mecole Hardman role, the Kadarius Toney role. A lot of stuff around the line of scrimmage and then a lot of vertical stuff. Their ADOTs can still be low and in the similar range to where Rice is, but it's a distribution thing. It's either line of scrimmage or deep, whereas Rice ran a lot of routes into those intermediate and short intermediate ranges. He's the Kelsey handcuff, essentially, assuming the legal stuff is all sorted out. But everything I hear about the legal stuff, Shawn, everyone's talking maybe a 1 to 2 game suspension, maybe not a suspension at all, maybe not something that doesn't get resolved in 2024. It's not great to take a player that you think might get suspended, but it doesn't seem like he's going to miss half the season. To be getting him in the late 5th just seems absolutely wild. Pitts makes it around the wrap, still at the top of our queue. I'm absolutely loving this start, Shawn. We now have paired London with Pitts. That makes Kirk Cousins a very reasonable option at quarterback down the road. unless that means that Michael Penix is the option, Shawn.
Yeah, that could run into a little trouble there. One of the things that's been very nice in this draft, Ben, that we don't necessarily often see is that these guys that we were targeting have fallen slightly below ADP. And I mean, this early in the draft, they're not huge values, but you actually get almost a 5-pick value on Devontae Smith. You get that 3-pick value on Rice. You get a 2-pick value on Laporta. You get a 1.5-pick value on Kyle Pitts. if we can continue to execute, there will be an element to this draft that I'm not even really going to be prioritizing a ton in 2024. But when you can get it, you certainly want it.
You were one thing I wanted to add, Shawn. You were mentioning the Devonta Smith thing. I wanted to throw in there as well, but we jumped into our picks. Is also just how I feel like his class of player was discussed so much, which was that high value number 2 in his own offense last year. It was him, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins that were all going in like the second round last year, and people lumped them all together, and they all more or less underperformed. Jalen Waddle has finally started to recoup some of that value, but early in the offseason, all 3 of them got pushed down, I think, more than they should. And it's one of those dynamics that a little bit of a larger dynamic, I think, where like a player is grouped into a cohort that maybe doesn't do justification to their individual case. And as you made Devonta's case, I was just thinking through that. You certainly have to like getting him at a lot cheaper of a price this year than last year when his situation hasn't dramatically changed. To the extent it's changed, I mean, they might be, I guess, maybe a expectation to be a little bit more run heavy with Saquon Barkley, but I mean, we saw them actually throw a little bit more, and some of the stuff about them having to face a tougher schedule and getting into more pass situations, and those things did sort of prove to be true. He had some individual disappointing elements, as you talked about the second half being stronger, like certainly more on the first half that was a little bit disappointing. But I mean, his situation hasn't gotten so much worse that anyway, I love that take. I think getting him in the 4th round feels great relative to a profile that shouldn't be that much different than what we were looking at in the 2nd round last year. If we're really stepping back and looking at all the layers of everything.
And in a season that was disappointing, I mean, he had 56% of his games, and he played, the whole season, were wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. And so, I mean, that'll work for you very well.
Yeah. 80 catches, 1,000+ yards, 7 touchdowns in 16 games, doesn't play in week 18 because they didn't need to win. And then it's one playoff game. He goes 8 for 148 on 12 targets. I mean, he had a good year. He didn't have the year that we hoped, but in fantasy, when you have the really high expectation 2nd round pick and it starts slow, especially you get the primacy effect and all of that, people over respond a lot of the time. We are back on the clock here, Shawn. You've put some quarterbacks into the queue. You maybe want to push them down a little. You like Jalen Warren here as our RB1 potentially?
I think that would possibly make sense. James Conner, Raheem Mostert, those guys, you like them better or want to wait on them?
I'm comfortable either way. You just moved Mostert ahead of Warren. Okay. We were down to like 3 seconds on the clock there. That was it wasn't a filibuster, but it was the classic. I don't know what I can really get out here in the 3 seconds.
JSN went 2 picks ahead of us there.
Went 2 picks ahead of us. I was looking on my other screen at stuff related to a Devonta Smith, and that was a quick turn between the 6th and the 7th. We do take Jalen Warren at 7-10 as our first running back. I'm used to seeing Javonte Williams hanging out in that range. He's lost value because of, I guess, the Audric Estime draft pick. I thought he was one of the low-key winners. I mean, huge winners with the Bo Nix draft pick, and then low-key winner without them really adding a ton. I absolutely love Javonte Williams as an early running back in a 0 RB build. Once you finally crack into the running back range. We still have Mostert here on the board too. You have some running backs at the top. I'll leave this open to you. It would be a pretty big reach by current ADP on Javonte.
Do you like Mostert here? Are you trying to get some shares of him, or are you almost completely out with Wright also there?
I'm not almost completely out on the guy who led the NFL in touchdowns last year. No, let's get a share of Mostert. Okay. I mean, it's they add more depth there. They grab Jalen Wright. Certainly makes sense when Raheem Mostert's an injury-prone 32-year-old running back. I do think that they are going to trust Raheem Mostert to do the things that Raheem Mostert does. I don't think to me, Raheem Mostert is not the type of veteran back that gets usurped by a rookie 4th-round pick. They love him. They are going to use him until he gets hurt. They are drafting a contingency value, a contingency back.
And they've locked
This
in
is a
little
30
bit more contract wise. One of the things that I love to see here, and we do point it out, but we want to make sure we point it out as we're actually in the draft, is that you can go with those 4 wide receivers and the 2 elite tight ends and get multiple starting running backs
Right.
still to lead out your running back position.
See, that's where in my head I was thinking, well, we'll wind up with Javonte Williams. We probably won't see him fall all the way to 9-10, but might still have a shot at him. But to get Jalen Warren and Raheem Mostert, even still, to start a 0 RB build where we're going to be able to hit it with volume a little bit in the later rounds, hit some rookies, hit some of those things, some late season upside from the rookies is all very exciting. But yeah, just to wrap up the Mostert thing, one of the craziest stats for me on him, Sean, 21 touchdowns last year at age 31, had 19 prior in his career. So he's now up to 40 career NFL touchdowns. He had more than half of those in 2023. So that's a guy that certainly, we knew was a late bloomer and has had those injury issues and all of those things. But in terms of okay, do you want to bank on a 32-year-old? Well, if the 32-year-old just had more than half of his career touchdowns last season, then I'm not really oh, he's going to hit the age cliff. He's in his prime. That was his prime last year. That was his absolute. There's no other part of his career that could be argued as the prime of this guy's career. It's a little bit different than oh, are we reaching for a guy's, age 23, age 24, age 25 prime when he's now 32? He didn't have any production at that age in the NFL. He wasn't even really a player in the NFL. I mean, I'm not trying to make the case of less tread on the tires as much as to say that to the extent that you think Raheem Mostert is anything, it's because of age 30 plus production, or at least age, 27 was when he really had his first breakout year for San Francisco in 2019. But most of all of this is in the last few years. He's an outlier regardless, is I guess the case that I'm trying to make.
He definitely is. And Ben, as we head back toward round 9, one of the reasons I put the quarterbacks in the stack in the queue was just to make sure I continue to remind myself which guys fit with the players we've already drafted and about where they will go, so we don't lose track of that completely. That's something that can happen when you're more excited about drafting the other positions. It looks like there's a decent chance that Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers will be guys that we could get on the 11-12 turn if we want. Jared Goff would probably be coming back in round 10. I've also put Jaden Daniels there because I think you should get a lot of Jaden Daniels. And I don't think you necessarily even need to have him with somebody, although you can put him with, Ben, one of your favorites late in Luke McCaffrey. We are now 4 picks away. And Javonte Williams hasn't gone yet. But the other 3 guys I really like here, 2 of whom are also pretty far below ADP. You had the 2 big rookies of Brooks and Benson. And then I guess I don't understand Chase Brown's ADP.
Yeah, the Bengals not attacking running back is significant for Chase Brown. He now becomes the exciting player from last year. So Javonte does make it. The 3 picks ahead of us went really quick there. We'll talk about Chase Brown in a second, Sean. He's got the higher ADP, a shot to come back around this turn. You feel good about Williams, or do you want to go Trey? I also think Trey Benson's a strong pick in this range, but we're going to take Javonte Williams in a 0 RB build. I really like the floor that he provides. I know everyone's really concerned about the efficiency last year, and rightfully so. He was not very good, but he was coming back from a multi-knee ligament injury. I think that's, again, I talked about this concept of double counting multiple times already on this show, but when we talk about expectations going into seasons and then guys hit those expectations, I mean, people were fading Javonte Williams last year relative to his earlier career perceptions because of coming back from a multi-knee ligament injury. What we got was Sean Payton, a new head coach, buying into Javonte Williams and using him very heavily as far as his overall workload and all of those things. We're already back on the clock. Quick turn there. Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson are the only 2 backs that go. So we still have Benson on the board as well as Chase Brown. Got some quarterbacks in here. I think I would probably just take the Benson falling value. 10 picks behind ADP.
So we'll grab Benson. I do want to have just a gigantic share of Chase Brown, even though I
Yeah.
think there's a very realistic chance that Zach Moss is the guy, right? I don't want to act like it's locked in any way, shape, or form. I want to have a huge amount of Chase Brown, but having Benson available there is kind of one of those outs, Ben, where now we stay away from like the 50% share or the 70% share or something.
Right. We have 2 more drafts today, Sean. We're gonna take Chase Brown today at that ADP. I think we are in full agreement on that position.
I kind of had moved up for you a little bit just to kind of keep your eye on it was the Caleb Williams was way below ADP, and he's someone I think is interesting, just empty. And so didn't need to take him with Trey Benson 10 spots below ADP, but we'll keep
explain
as we go through.
Explain the empty thing, because I definitely understood it with Daniels where he could have 1,000-yard rushing season. For Caleb, I guess I would think that the upside scenario refers back to a lot of, I mean, I feel like he's going to be paired with one of those early draft picks in a lot of the drafts where he gets selected. It's interesting to see him slide because you do have a Keenan Allen drafter, and a DJ Moore drafter and a Rome Odunze drafter. What's your thought about him solo?
Well, one of the elements I think you got to look at is that, and I was checking there,
he did just go unstacked. Interesting.
He goes to none of those 3 players. So I think one of the things I did in the deep dive on him in the Rookie 101 series is look at the fact that his designed runs fell through college, and that's where he was getting a ton of his value, because when he scrambles, he doesn't actually scramble under pressure. He doesn't scramble without pressure in the same way that the rest of the guys in that group do. And that's kind of problematic for you in some ways if you're wanting to get the rushing value. He is freakishly athletic on the runs, though. And I think that there's the potential for the designed run, or just the way that he's involved in the running game, even if it is just telling him, look, when you're out there scrambling, you don't have something, let's not extend this play and throw it away or take a sack. Just go ahead and take those 6-7 yards. You're that athletic. I think we're going to see more of that, even if that's not his intuitive style. The other thing is just, I think the 3 receivers are all going to be difficult to take in drafts. And so if you want him some, you're going to take him empty every once in a while. And it will be in a case where he is way below ADP like he was here.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when you start talking about that ADP value. It doesn't have to be stacked when you're starting to get 10, 15. Wasn't that about 20 slots of ADP value that the drafter eventually got at 115? Isn't his ADP in the low 90s? Wow. Yeah, you're nodding.
Yeah, 96 today, it looks like.
So about almost 20 picks of ADP value. Pretty huge note there. But we also get 10 picks of ADP value on a fellow rookie, Troy Benson, who we kind of moved past to just talk excitedly about Chase Brown. But Benson feels like a very similar play to Brown as well. The Cardinals take him as the second running back off the board. They take him with just the second pick of the 3rd round. He does fall to the 3rd round, but I mean, really high up in the 3rd round, right? Very athletic back. We talked about him a lot in the pre-draft shows, but I loved the landing spot from the perspective of James Conner's good and has been good and has stayed healthy, but is clearly getting old. And we know the stuff about the age cliff and all of that. And when you start to think about your traditional rookie back, gets behind a veteran back, late season type of, okay, maybe there's an injury, maybe there's just a changing of the guard. They did invest some capital in him. This is just like a very traditional rookie back pick. To get him in the 10th round, you feel like on a team where we already took Raheem Mostert, Javonte Williams, Jaylen Warren, I feel like we're comfortable with touches out of the gate. We're comfortable with floor of volume. Javonte, we didn't really get a finish up. Yeah, he had some efficiency issues, but feel really great about his volume and the way that Peyton used him last year. And then the addition of Bo Nix and how Peyton likes to use the passing game as an extension of the run game. And Nix was incredible at that last year at Oregon. Really high completion percentage in the short areas of the field. Javonte Williams is going to catch a lot of passes this year. It's half PPR, but it's still going to be good for him to rack up yardage. And it's going to be good for him to have a solid playable floor. And now we add some of that spike week late season blow up potential with Trey Benson to this running back build. I love the way that it's meshing together. Chase Brown, same concept, explosive player, one of the fastest. I think, was he the fastest ball carrier in the NFL last year? I think maybe he was clocked as the very fastest, one of the fastest, if not, and only had like
the play it would have been. He looked absolutely shot out of a cannon.
Yeah, he was incredibly explosive. And Sean, we're we're one pick away. He's still there. He makes it all the way back to us.
Yeah, I mean, we
More than 10 picks below ADP on him as well. That's part of the reason, even as you said it, okay, well, we won't get us to 70% Chase Brown this year. But we'll diversify a little bit. One of the reasons you do take Benson there, who has a much higher ADP, almost 20 picks higher than Brown, is Benson's not making it back to you at 11-10, but there is that possibility the guy you like more with the lower ADP comes back to you and you really hit the home run. And that's what you're trying to do on these best ball drafts, even more so than, managed leagues. You'll see us reach for our guy that we truly like more, but trying to navigate the little bits of best ball drafting where you might be able to stack up all the players you like on one roster. That's what you're really trying to do. This has been a really fun first draft for us here, Sean. We only have 4 receivers, something we'll have to get back to and address later, but we are able to hit on a ton of really key running backs for a build that started without any running backs through 5 rounds. We are back up here. Did we miss all of our QBs?
Aaron Rodgers is still there. He is a little bit ahead of ADP, but that's not a huge consideration. He doesn't necessarily project to come back. Trevor Lawrence is way below ADP. We don't really have any specific reason to take him, but if you like him, he would be an option.
Rodgers with Garrett Wilson, I think, is a nice pick here. We did get enough, not enough, but I mean, the 5 running back, Sean, we could even be done at running back in this build. We could take a Charbonnet or something, but we really do need to consider some wide receiver depth as well. I like getting Rodgers there just because we do have the Garrett Wilson team and we weren't able to get access to Kirk Cousins. So Cousins went, that was, I guess, one of the things that happened with some of our running back picks there. He went 2 picks before where we got Chase Brown. We're so excited about Chase Brown falling back. Probably more other people would have been sitting there hoping the Cousins stack comes back to them. We had both London and Pitts. That's one of those things where, I mean, if we wanted Cousins now in hindsight, we would have had to take him 10-03. When you have both of the key players that are stacked with him, typically you want to try to push it because people may not take him unstacked. Cousins being a pocket passer, got a top 10 quarterback drafted in behind him, is still rehabbing an Achilles. Would make sense that he could be a little bit of a slider. Would have hoped to have been able to get him at that turn. He doesn't make it back. You also had Goff in our queue. He didn't make it back. He goes to a drafter who had Jameson Williams. Did that drafter in the 5 slot also have like Amon-Ra or anything? No, they had Ja'Marr Chase, but Jameson Williams gets him stacked up. We have Laporta, so we could have potentially gone with Goff, but to get the quarterback of our first round pick is certainly a fine selection there. I agree with you, Lawrence. I think I would rank Lawrence ahead of Rodgers probably. Is that sort of what you were alluding to?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, Jared Goff was the player who was actually a big value. When Cousins was taken, he wasn't really a value either. And so from that perspective, it may be a little bit of an odd pick. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is tough, and he does go to a team that didn't have any Jaguars. And so it was someone who was just simply willing to take the value at a certain point. But I mean, what's Trevor Lawrence going to do for you? I have him at QB 17 down there in that 11, that big kind of 11 range where you have a lot of different quarterbacks, but not necessarily as any type of meaningful value. Cousins and Goff are higher for me. A couple picks ahead of Aaron Rodgers, but not a big deal there.
But a really fun team at this stage. So to catch everyone up while we have a second, we're actually rapidly moving back towards our pick here in the 13th. We have 1 QB. We have 5 running backs. Feel pretty good about the running back situation. Don't necessarily need to tack on there. And the 2 tight ends. We took both Laporta and Pitts. The only receivers we have are Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Devonta Smith, and Rashee Rice. We are back up, Sean. You just moved Kendre Miller to the top of the board. Certainly like him. He's one we can talk a little bit more about.
And what happened there? Marshawn Lloyd went. I moved Jalen Polk up, even though he wasn't in the queue at all. Marvin Mims is kind of my guy. Who's your preference?
I think it would be Polk. Wait, Miller's going to go. Okay, we're going to grab Polk. the clock ticking down there. Mims, I'm worried about. Interesting to hear you say he's kind of your guy. I'm worried about what the addition of and it's now escaping me. Troy Franklin in the early fourth. They went and traded up for Franklin, who played in college with Bo Nix. A little bit of a redundancy in the skill sets. I don't mind Mims. I'm not saying I'd be out on Mims, but I do think I'd like to get some pretty good prices on him. I think he's going to slide. I think people are going to be a little out on. Although, I mean, we have already invested in Denver. Another low-key thing I liked about taking Polk there is we have the Jet stack. I noticed we already have Mostert. And so now we have a player from two different AFC East teams. We don't have the schedule yet, but potentially thinking about little game stacks in week 17. Small tiebreaker. We're back up. You just moved Drake May up, and that's a really intriguing one. He would only be 7 picks ahead of ADP. And we only have one QB, and we now have his highest drafted receiver in Jalen Polk. We could also go Kendrick Miller or any other direction. Marvin Mims did go on that turn. Sean drafts Drake May there. I think that was a really smart little addition to the queue there, Sean. Do you like?
We're getting pretty. You're going to bet on Polk, that you've got to bet on Drake May, because I mean, I was maybe inappropriately down on May after the draft because I thought they wasted 2 shots to add interesting receivers. Now, Baker, who we could also take late because, we're still just sitting at the 5 receivers. I like his chances to actually be the top guy there. But one of the reasons for the Polk is you want to bring that humility to the table about being wrong on your evaluation. And he was going to be the right kind of pick by ADP in a draft where the receivers were going a little bit early. So I wanted to throw him up. Then once you get him, you go with Drake May. And now I think we have to consider Baker too.
Yeah. That's exactly how I'm
there. I think can be fun.
I that's exactly how I'm thinking about it as well, Sean. I know Jalen Polk's a Husky guy. We joke a lot about my love for the Huskies, and I like Jalen Polk. I didn't take him, I don't think, one time in my pre-draft picks, and I took a lot of Jalen McMillan. And we talked through, Sean, about how McMillan kind of felt like somebody who maybe from a profile perspective should have been going ahead of Polk at that time. But the Polk stuff was certainly because there were some scouts that really liked Polk. There were some evaluators that thought he would get some draft capital, and he goes with the 5th pick of the 2nd round into an open passing game. Now, is Demario Douglas also not somebody that would be interesting in this build at this point? Is he going higher?
He's 176, so he is available. Okay. I know that he was their guy last year. It does feel to me like that was because the rest of their team was so bad. But again, fair. And you want to make sure that if it comes at the right price and the right situation, that you at least consider it. The funny thing is the Polk wasn't in the queue because he's not a target for me. Javon Baker already was. And so now it will be especially fun if, we are able to get him perhaps without reaching too much.
I do like that, by the way. I like Baker more than Douglas in the sense of, and I agree with you in what you were saying about this being a fun combination, because one of the things about May is his willingness to take some of these shots. Both Polk and Baker are more downfield receivers. We are playing best ball here. The idea is, especially as you start to think through just maybe some late season upside in the major tournament weeks, the potential for some spike weeks from May, and a spike week from a rookie quarterback like him late in the year, it's probably not 8 for 90 from Demario Douglas that gets you there. It's a long touchdown from Jalen Polk or Javon Baker. It's that type of. So I'm with you. I think Baker makes more sense, but I think Douglas, I disagree with you a little bit on the evaluation. It's going to be our new Jacob Myers. I could already tell. But it's like,
I was thinking about that before. I'm like, well, I mean, Ben is going to talk me into that a year ago.
Yeah. And maybe I think you make a fair point on Douglas. I don't have as big of a reason to like him as Myers. One of the big reasons I like Myers was he earned the playing time basically 2 years in a row. Douglas had the one really strong season. For Myers, they after his first good sort of year or half year, they didn't start him the next year, and then he earned the work again. So I felt pretty good about his ability to actually earn the volume and all those things. And then secondly, on Douglas is you have a new coaching staff, you have a new system, you have a new roster around him, all these new receivers. It could be a whole different feel. So we are back up. Baker makes it back. a little bit ahead of ADP on him. Where would you go here? I feel like I've been kind of last second making our last few picks. You have a lot of rookies in the queue. What are you
I
thinking?
think it's potentially interesting to take Irving, but let's go ahead and just make sure we get Baker. It doesn't matter too much the ADP
I like that
value at this point. And then we can look
So,
at these
Shawn,
guys. Just
for
to
those
keep people up
listening,
on some interesting names. Yeah. Jalen Wright went mid 14, Kendra right after that. And then the guy that you mentioned early that I think, again, one of these players I do expect to have an absolute ton of, Kamani Vital goes early in 15.
which is a great, I mean, it's not like a really late pick or anything, but I think is a great addition. And I mean, he should be going in the 15th round. Bucky Irving was the other name you just mentioned that you had slid to the top of the queue for those just listening on audio. So a potential sixth running back for this build. We are up to 6 receivers. So we have a 2-5-6-2 right now. I mean, I kind of would like to get a third quarterback in this build, or are you comfortable with just Aaron Rodgers and Drake May?
I'm pretty comfortable with those guys, especially now that we have the 2 Patriots receivers, because there's a little bit of an all or nothing element to that at this point.
I agree with that.
However, if we don't have a guy we like in round 18 and we like a quarterback, I'm definitely fine adding the third one.
Yeah, I like that take, because especially with the commitment to the receivers and also Garrett Wilson, we need Aaron Rodgers to be healthy and have a good season. We've seen what it means for Garrett Wilson when he has to, whoever the Jets are going to go try to get at quarterback to address a non-Aaron Rodgers situation is just not going to work. We are back up. If you want to add Bucky Irving here to get, we don't want it. So Jaleel McLaughlin is the top running back. I just realized we do have Javonte, so we don't probably want to make that move. Jermaine Burton slid a little bit. You just moved him up. He's intriguing to me as well. But Bucky Irving is fine. I'm fine with any of those. Okay. We go with Irving.
The case that I have made on him is that once he was drafted at a spot where his team seemed to be fading the size athleticism concerns, which were huge, right? And this is a small guy who tested with non-NFL athleticism. But if we look specifically at the production, he was the best back in this class. And he had done it for several years. He's a high-value touch guy. There's a ton of overlap with Rachaad White. And I was wrong on Rachaad White last season, and I really did like what he did over the last 2/3 of the season. I don't know that he fully consolidated that starting role. One of the reasons why he was still out there is because when they tried to put the backups in those first 6 weeks, they were even far worse. And so the Bucs are kind of like, well, yeah, we'll do what we got to do, which is to play the guy who
that led to me,
bad,
Shawn,
not terrible.
That led to me writing an article arguing that Chase Edmonds might be the sleeper pickup of the year because of what you just said. It seemed like they needed somebody else to be able to play behind Rachaad White. But obviously Chase Edmonds also wasn't the answer. So it was just a lot of Rachaad White. I love that take. And to your point, he ends up going as the RB6 in the draft. And in pre-draft, I think for a lot of people it was around like RB10. I noticed the same thing in watching day 3. Oh, Irving went a little higher in this class than I think people had him. A lot of evaluators had him. And my point being round 4 draft capital is not extreme, but just to emphasize your point, it's good enough that he went ahead of a lot of other guys, and it says that the Bucs were willing to look past some of the concerns. And once you look past those concerns, as you just said, a great statistical profile and other reasons to be in on him.
And we would certainly not expect anybody to be the next Kyren Williams, but he is in that same mold. And one of the things that the Rams said over and over is that you guys have to understand what he's going to do on the field. He's going to be a star. I'm certainly not saying that the Bucs feel that way or are claiming that about Irving, but he was that good on the field, and their starter is just fine. I think that Irving is going to be the starter in the final third of the season. Which is
the case you have to make, I think, when we took 5 straight to go to an RB6 in this build. And I mean, I was comfortable going to an RB6 anyway, but you could have made the case that we could have just went to like 9 or what would it have been? Oh, I guess if we're doing 2 QBs and 2 tight ends, we still have a lot of roster spots to play with. So I'm kind of
we can add 2 more receivers to get to 8 here.
Oh yeah, right. So if we would have went
Depending
5, we
on
would have went to 9. I'm struggling to do the math, Sean. The pre-draft best ball drafts were 20 rounds. The math was hard for me there. So at the top of the queue here, you got your guy, Devontae Walker, who landed in a fun day 3 spot as well. We have not talked a ton about him, but relatively early in the 4th round, he goes to the Ravens. We talked on the show about the Ravens being an interesting landing spot for someone, if someone were to land there. They did just extend Rashad Bateman, which I thought was very interesting. And Walker goes 1 pick ahead of us anyway, so we'll save that conversation for another time. We are back on the clock, and I think it's got to be a couple wide receivers here in the final 2 rounds. You're moving Kendrick Bourne to the top. I like that. Our boy Jacob Cowing towards the top. I think he makes a lot of sense. I have not played around with these late round receivers. Rondale Moore, Sean, I mean, now that he's in Atlanta, I've thrown him on stacks where we have Cousins. We are invested in London and Pitts and didn't get Cousins. So I don't know if Moore makes a ton of sense on this roster, but he'd be a fun one to tack on to Cousins teams where if the Falcons offense is really fun and Cousins is a real hit, you'd think that they're using Rondale Moore in some creative ways. It's the offensive coordinator that was with the Rams last year. I've been thinking that they might use more like the Rams were able to use Tutu Atwell with some of the exit motions and getting him some free releases, even though he's a little smaller, getting him into some space downfield. Moore's got the explosiveness to have similar production on those types of routes as what we saw from Atwell at times last year. That would be fun. We do take Kendrick Bourne there in the late 17th. We are now looking at one more pick. You still have a lot of running backs in the queue here. Talk through what you're thinking structurally. Do you like maybe a 2-7-7-2 here?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that, especially when we had the 4 really good receivers early. I think it's a question of just overall, how much does it help you to add a really borderline receiver versus how much does it help you to add someone who could be the overall league winner or tournament winner. You think about trying to get your Kyron Williams in the final round. Then one of the things here for me, Jacob Cowing, I think, has a great chance. You look at these double dip situations with the receivers. Colin and I had Danny Kelly on overtime, and we were asking him about some of those, which ones were fun. I think that Jacob Cowing has a great chance to outperform Ricky Pearsall. I think if you're selling or if you're buying into the idea that they're going to almost certainly move either Debo or Brandon Ayuk, and especially if they're going to move Debo, I think that Cowing is the pick. If you're more skeptical of that, I think that Shipley or Tracy is the pick.
Let's take Cowing. I really like the Cowing profile. And to hear your optimism about that landing spot, I was intrigued by him landing with San Francisco. I felt like it was an A- landing spot because I really wanted him to land with the Bills. But that was my A+. Like, I was going to get super excited. But he's a guy that I've talked about over at Stealing Signals, really liking the targets per out run profile, a lot of those things. Sean, last couple of years, he was incredible early at UTEP, transfers to Arizona, and you can say, okay, UTEP's just UTEP, and he wasn't as good at Arizona, but still earned a lot of volume at Arizona in a different role, lower ADOT, more of a sort of a underneath receiver role. He was a downfield guy, a high ADOT guy at UTEP, and explosive and really strong production. Still earns a lot of volume in the underneath role, but alongside, and part of the reason for that, the contextual thing, the point I'm trying to get to here with Arizona in his role there, is they have a receiver that's still in college that's going to be one of the top receivers in the coming classes. I think it's Tetroya McMillan. He's a star, big, physical, more downfield, true X receiver. If you go back and watch any of Arizona last year. And so Cowing kind of had to play off of that a little, but still earned a lot of volume as that number 2. I go, it's not a comparison because they're completely different athletes. But Brian Thomas, John, we talked about a lot how to make the case for him, you have to justify the lack of target earning as being alongside Malik Neighbors. And certainly I'm not saying McMillan is on Neighbors level, but I look at Cowing and say, here's a guy who was playing alongside a future potential first-round pick in the NFL who had an awesome season, had like 1,600 yards, McMillan. And Cowing still earned a ton of volume in his role alongside that. That's a favorable thing or data point for me, in addition to the early career, awesome breakout, huge numbers at UTEP, really dominated at the lower level. So his profile is really exciting. You add him there as our 8th receiver. And if, as you were talking through the landing spot and the potential for Debo to get traded and to open up a move player, we know that the Niners are going to be good at getting the ball into the hands of players as well. And like Cowing's an athlete. That's exciting. That's an exciting pick.
It's pretty fun. I mean, it may end up being a throwaway pick, but all of those things that you said, I think really help people understand his trajectory. I mean, you're talking about a guy in that final season at UTEP averages almost 20 yards per catch. He averages, over 3.5 yards per team attempt. He's got a 40% dominator. And then last year, as you mentioned, competing with other big time players, has 13 receiving touchdowns. This is a 4.38 40 guy. I mean, the 49ers think he'll be good with the ball in his hands. They think he can get deep. I don't want to get too crazy and be like, he's going to definitely outperform Pearsall. But there's a real chance that he outperforms Pearsall.
Pearsall's an interesting one too, though, because if the Niners can scheme up touches for him, he's athletic and he's, you would think he'd have the potential to make some plays after the catch and those things, working off of some other players that are going to draw more volume. I've gotten a little bit more. We were pretty down on Pearsall in our mock draft and in our conversations on the show. So it'll be interesting to talk through him a little bit more, but a massive gap in price. Pearsall goes 12-10. We get Cowing here in the 18th round, probably goes on draft if we don't take him. So our final team, Sean, we wind up with a pretty zero RB build. The late wide receivers for us, it was 3 straight Patriots. We didn't really dive into grabbing Kendrick Bourne there in the 17th, but it allowed us sort of a triple stack, or actually a triple stack with Drake May, building off that concept we talked through of, if May's going to have some spike weeks and we're playing it as a 2 QB build and we're saying May's a hit as a rookie, he's going to bring along a different, receiver potentially each week. And Demario Douglas did go in between our 15 and 16 picks, between where we took Javon Baker and Bucky Irving at that turn. So we wind up with the 3 Patriots, but our final roster, Sean, we started Garrett Wilson and Drake London in the first 2 rounds. We went with Laporta in round 3, and then 2 more receivers, Devonta Smith in early round 4 and Rashee Rice in late 5, Kyle Pitts in early 6. So our first 6 picks, 4 receivers, 2 tight ends, no running backs. I think there's a strategy that is, it's the no running backs strategy, I think it's called.
No running backs, yeah.
In the 7th through the 11th, we took a lot of running backs. It's the lot of running back strategy. Jaylen Warren, Raheem Mostert, Javonte Williams, Trey Benson, Chase Brown. Talked about liking both Benson and Brown as sort of more explosive secondary pieces to starters that will probably have plenty of volume in James Conner and Zach Moss, but those are the types of traditional 0 RB target, second guy, has a little bit more juice, might be the guy that could really break out if the starter got hurt. Fun pieces to add behind, as you talked about during the draft. 3 guys that we feel good about their volume for a 0 RB draft to get Jaylen Warren, Raheem Mostert, and Javonte Williams as your first 3 backs. God, I love that running back room for how much running back capital we had to spend. From there, Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Polk, Drake May, Javon Baker, Bucky Irving, Kendrick Bourne, and Jacob Cowing. The back end of the receiver group is my concern, to the extent that we might have one, and maybe the quarterbacks as well with Rodgers and May. What are your thoughts on our build?
I love it. I mean, I think that the start through 11 is fantastic. Then once we get to Aaron Rodgers, we are saying, I mean, it's got to be Garrett Wilson now, which he's your first round pick. It needs to be that anyway. I mean, we had some teams, certainly I had some teams with other drafters where it was a Wilson-Rodgers team that even last year that worked out and got them very deep because Rodgers, obviously wasn't there. So you have to overcome that. I'm hoping that we don't face that situation again. I think the teams are going to be pretty broken if you don't have those 2 guys together. But once we got into Polk and May, I felt like it was such a strong bet on that element working, that May works, that the Patriots approach works. That I think this team fits very nicely, because once you're betting on Drake May and kind of committing to the 2 quarterbacks, then he's got to be a star. So I think that it's a team that's heavily reliant on the Patriots, but if they do well, this team is just going to absolutely gap the rest of the league, and then it positions you nicely for the postseason element.
Absolutely. And this is one of those, best ball specific things. This isn't us saying that we're really confident in the Patriots. It's us saying that the value sort of played out that way, that we were able to build our set. We went with a late round quarterback strategy. We ended up getting Polk and then stacking with May there, and being able to build out a late stack on the Patriots was structurally sound for what we needed to do in the late rounds and what this tournament is. I don't think either of us is arguing that we wanted to be heavily built into the Patriots, but it's that thing of you only have to get one thing right now. It's that humility-based drafting that you were talking about. We love a lot of the other stuff and the decisions we had to make early. It's not a guarantee that Laporta Pitts is going to be a monster win at tight end, but I think, we're not really emphasizing it, but we both feel like we're going to gain tight end points on the field in a strong way. We did talk a lot about liking the running back, the texture of that running back build. Obviously, the early receivers give you a lot of firepower at the top of the receiver position, and you are a little bit thin there and a little bit fragile there. One of the things that we did through all those middle rounds is say, and we're very comfortable saying, we don't need to be extremely heavy on wide receiver or chasing wide receiver. There's that comment that we've talked about in the past, Sean, that the draft doesn't care what your needs are. We end up adding the receivers late. I bring that up because you were talking about that as well in the 18th round, where we could have still added a 7th running back. Sure, like we would like to have another really good receiver in this build, but we took Jacob Cowan. I mean, like it's admittedly a flyer. As excited as we are about him, you don't get to just add a good receiver in the 18th round, right? So like you have to make a decision. What actually increases your chances of winning? And if that means that this is a really thin build at receiver, if that's the way that we would have gone, and it still maybe could be argued as a thin build at receiver, we have the 4 late receivers. 3 of them are rookies. 2 of those rookies are day 3 rookies. And so you start to get into, okay, it's pretty thin. And the other guy is Kendrick Bourne. And so it's not like we're, really confident in those late 4 receivers.
Kendrick Bourne, superstar, Ben.
Superstar. But how does this win? Well, I mean, you can get by if those top 4 receivers. I had some teams last year, Sean, that had Keenan Allen and Mike Evans together. And it was shocking to me how bad the wide receiver 5 through 8 could be on some of those builds. But if your wide receiver 3 and 4 really hit, and I had like a Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, Mike Evans, that was one of my best regular season teams. And it was so thin behind that. But if you really hit on those first 4 receivers, you can really hit. I mean, it's just one of those best ball things where. And so the question is, what do you do in the late rounds? How do you can't fix depth issues with flyers is sort of the point I'm trying to make. We wind up going the directions we do intentionally at receiver, but I just wanted to add that point as you were thinking about potentially going to a 2-7-7-2 build here. And I had been talking about maybe staying to a 5 running back build and not necessarily thinking we had to add more running backs. Even when we added Irving as our 6th running back, I do still fully understand what you were thinking there and how if it's the running backs late that are the best piece for your build, and then, we could be potentially flexing running backs a lot of the way. We're just really strong at running back. That's okay. Like that's an answer that you can potentially go with.
And that's one of the things that taking the 4 receivers early and taking only the 2 quarterbacks and only the 2 elite tight ends will allow you to do is that you can add those running backs that you like really late. I added Polk in because at that point there were basically no more receivers that we liked. And so we wanted to build something out that was a little bit different. We're not going to have much of that, but we're going to have it in a situation like that where it makes sense.